Thank you for joining us. As we mark Holocaust Memorial Day here in the UK, I'm joined by Helen Joyce, the author of a new historical fiction novel, Good for a Single Journey. Helen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's like a sunny Netanya.
Yes, actually, coming up for a lovely sunset, I hope.
Great. So Helen, you are a mother, a wife, a grandmother. You're also the former head of sixth form at Immanuel College, and you now have a new career as an author. Very exciting.
Yes.
Now, your family story is one of forced migration, tragedy, and triumph with the backdrop of World War I and World War II. And it's a compelling story. So please, can you tell me how you came to write the novel?
Well, I think I always wanted to write a book which had the background of my mother's story. I felt that both my parents, but particularly my mother, had a very difficult ride through her teenage years and her early adult years and throughout her adulthood. And I wanted to chronicle, I wanted to give some meaning to her story. And retrospectively, I hope that I have finally done that. I think I thought about writing a book for something like 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they say that writing a book there's a sort of metaphor that it's a bit analogous to giving birth. Well, as a woman who's given birth 3 times, I can tell you no, not really,
Right.
but there are some similarities. So I think the period of gestation for my book was something like 50 years.
Wow.
And there came a point when I finally realized that if I didn't start this book, if I didn't do it, I would never do it. So I did write the book relatively fast. So if you like, that was the giving birth process. And I have to say, there is nothing like unwrapping that box with your actual book in it. It's
Sure.
a very exciting moment when your baby is sort of delivered to you.
Right.
But what I'm coming to realize now is that, in a way, a bit like motherhood, that's only the beginning of the story, because your baby has to grow up, you have to nurture it, and it has to find a way to its own independent life. And I guess that's what we're about here, talking about the book, which has been published and is making its way. And that is very exciting. But what led me to write the book was wanting to give a voice to those who had been silenced. I felt that was my motivation, and that was something that haunted me from childhood.
Right. And when you say, well, are you specifically referring to then when you say that those have been silenced?
Well, my mother was born in Vienna, and I never knew my grandparents. They were murdered in Auschwitz, together with other families of wider family, extended family. There were survivors. But those grandparents, particularly, that I had never met, haunted her adult life. I had heard about them, but in a way, they almost seemed like fantasy figures. I knew that they had existed. I had seen pictures of them. Her brothers confirmed their existence, but I had never met anybody who actually knew them or could tell me tales other than my mother and her brothers about them. And it was actually a considerable shock to me when I think I was in my 30s or 40s, and I went out for a Shabbat lunch to friends of ours, Jeffrey and Rachel Paul, actually, who was a former editor of the Jewish Chronicle. And there was an old man there with an accent, and I asked him, "Where are you from?" He said, "Vienna." He said, "Oh, what was your mother's name?" And when he heard her name, he said, "Oh, I remember your grandfather. He had a beautiful singing voice." And it was such a shock because it was almost like independent verification of their existence.
Right.
So there was this need to bring them, in some sense, not back to life, but to help them, as I say, to give voice to them.
Right. Right. So as we said, this is your family story, particularly your great-grandparents, your grandparents, and your parents as well. Let's focus so much on your mother, because that's pivotal, I think, in terms of understanding the experience that she went through. And there's a particular, you mentioned in the book, it's a particular turning point in her life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, she was a spoiled rich girl in Vienna, had a good life there. And her turning point came on the 13th of March, 1938, precisely, which was the day that the Nazis marched into Vienna in an event which is referred to these days as the Anschluss. Austria was annexed to Nazi Germany. All the race laws, which had been brought in Germany in 1933, were then applied. A couple of weeks later, her father, my grandfather, was arrested by the Germans. He was a wealthy man. He was arrested actually at the Seder table and dragged away. And her life just, as she knew it, just collapsed. So that was the turning point for her.
Right.
And I started with her, but when I wanted to write about her story, I realized I had to take first one step back. And then when I thought about it, I took 2 steps back. And I went back as far as my great-grandparents, who I had heard about from some of her tales, but I also researched and found out more about what happened to them and their fate. So that's where the story starts.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Thank you. So you mentioned your great-grandparents then, and as you write about, they were forced to flee their homes in Galicia. Is that right?
Yes. They came.
Now there were 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Is that right?
Correct.
Now you mentioned the book. Can you explain a little bit how their fate differed?
Yes. Well, I realized when I really thought about how I would write this book and how I would develop it, I realized that they, as you say, they had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, one of whom was my grandmother, and their fates were very different. And I realized that although they were, Jewish family, very Orthodox Hasidic family in a town called Rosvadov, where I have since then met many people who come, lots of rabbis come from Rosvadov, apparently. And I realized that what had happened to their 5 children was the fate was so different for each child that in a way it provided me with a very useful route, a metaphor for what has happened to the Jewish people throughout the 20th century, or at least the first half of the 20th century. So my great-grandparents were forced, as you say, to flee as the Russians were invading their town of Rosvadov. They moved with their 5 children to Vienna, and from Vienna, the family fanned out. So 2 of the brothers went to then British mandate. Well, it wasn't even British mandate Palestine at that time. It was under Ottoman rule. They went to Palestine, as it was at the time, or actually it wasn't even Palestine. Before the British mandate, it was called the Vilayet of Southern Syria. It belonged to the Ottoman Empire. And I knew very little about those 2 brothers. And I have to admit that the bits of the book that are not based in absolute fact, that I wouldn't say I made up, but I gave them a life that I wanted to tell the story rather than I knew the facts. One sister, my grandmother's only sister, married and lived in Belgium. The facts about her are entirely correct. And the younger brother, Zissel, I didn't know a lot about. I knew he had gone back to Poland after the First World War with his parents, but I didn't know their fate, and I didn't know the fate of my great-grandparents. But Zissel's son, my mother's first cousin, Yitzhak, who lived in Israel and died only a few years ago in his late 90s, wrote a book, a little memory.
Wow.
It's actually a memoir, which was published by one of the Israeli organizations which collects survivors' testimony.
Amazing.
And in that book, I found out what happened to Zissel, exactly how this cousin made his dramatic way to pre-state Israel, and also what happened to my great-grandparents. I had always assumed that when the Nazis had invaded Rosvadov and cleared out the entire town and disposed of the Jewish life there, that they had perished then, but they did not. They had a story after, and I was able to track it thanks to that memoir.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about Pepe.
Yes.
She had an incredible story, right?
Pepe did have an incredible story. I'm hoping that some of the people who view this are going to want to read the book.
I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil the book, but
I
yes.
don't want to give too many spoilers.
No.
But actually,
her experiences in Auschwitz,
I have a picture which I only recently found at Yad Vashem, actually, of Pepe and her husband and her two older children. And she lived in Belgium, and she actually gave birth to a late baby after the Nazis had occupied Belgium, and she understood that the danger to her and her older children was imminent. They were on all the Nazi lists. All the community had been recorded at that time. They were all known about. And she gave birth in a convent, Catholic convent, and she left that baby there. And I'm not going to tell you what happened because people are just going to have to read the book if they wanted to find out. But it was an incredible story.
Absolutely. My goodness. Wow. If we could circle back to your mother now again, because we obviously mentioned what she went through as well, and clearly very traumatic experience of her. Can you tell us a little bit what sort of mark that left on her because of those experiences?
I mean, obviously, I only knew my mother when she was a mother. I never knew her before. But from what I heard from her brothers, she was a fun-loving, very beautiful girl. She enjoyed partying. She enjoyed all the things that young kids enjoy. She was sporty. She loved music. She loved skiing. She swam. She was, you know, she was a fun-loving girl. I knew her as a very depressed woman. I think the events that she went through, which were actually, I mean, she was a refugee. Yes, she had been left alone as a teenager in a strange country in England. But compared to some of the events which other people have endured, her experiences were not as brutal or as, you know, horrifying, I suppose. But it left a permanent mark on her. And I really do believe there is such a thing as intergenerational trauma. She was, I think by today's standards, clinically depressed. Nobody came into our home. We didn't have friends come in. She was worried whenever we went out. I had a Magen David. This is not my Magen David. I had a little, in fact, I gave it to my husband before we married. She always checked before I went for school. She made sure that my Magen David, which I always wore, was inside my school shirt. And I remember leaving the house and flicking it out with great, you know, I'm not frightened. You know, that's her story. It has nothing to do with me. England is different. That was then. This is now. I'm not sure I feel quite the same way now.
Well, that's interesting.
That's how I felt then. So the effect on her was very marked, and she became very damaged. She was very damaged and found motherhood very difficult. She found everything very difficult.
Obviously, it had an impact on your life as well, as you mentioned.
Yes,
in particular, specifically, that from her journey had impacted on your life.
It did, and it really did, and it not just on my life. But I have a sister. It had an impact on both of our lives. And I don't really know how to express that in an interview of this length. But there's a quote which I really love from a film called Home Alone. I'm sorry, it's a Christmas movie. I don't know if it's kosher to mention it. But in Home Alone, I don't know if you've ever seen it, the little boy who's left accidentally by himself has lots of adventures. And it's a Christmas film. And at the end of the film, he goes into the church and he meets this bogeyman that he always thought was had been told was some evil monster, but was actually a very nice old man. And the old man sits next to him and he asks him some questions. Have you been a good boy this year? And the child says, not really. And my brother is this, and my parents are that. It's sort of complaining. And the old man nods and sits quietly. And he says, the way you feel about your family is a very complicated thing. Sometimes they hurt you, and sometimes you hurt them. But beneath all that you will always love them. And I can only think that that script was written by a Jewish person, because families are very complicated things,
right.
and we go through phases. So yes, it certainly did have an impact. And I think writing the book helped me come to terms with many things in my life as well.
Interesting. Thank you. Talking obviously about families, and we were talking about your grandparents, great-grandparents. Tell us a bit about your granddaughters, because you know, I've heard you had the wonderful trips with them to mark their bat mitzvahs, and I think that's, you know, really relevant to us.
Well, oh gosh, you really shouldn't start a Jewish grandmother on the subject of her grandchildren. I never thought. We're very blessed. We have a few grandchildren, and our son has 4 children who are older. My daughter is much younger than her brother, and she has 3 very little boys. My son has 4 children who are older, and we have we decided, along with other grandparents who were able to do it, that as they came, the first 3 are all girls, that when they came to bat mitzvah, we would sort of take a grandparent trip with each child somewhere special. And with the first one, Shoshana, hi Shoshana, if you're listening, we took her to Rome, which was terrific. I mean, we were barred from going into churches, but there's a lot of Jewish history in Rome that you can do without going into any churches. So that was fantastic. And when Shiri was bat mitzvah, Shiri, you get mentioned too, we took her to Barcelona, which is also a fantastic destination for a few days with her as a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah trip. And when granddaughter number 3 came to that age, we were scratching our heads. We had absolutely no idea, well, where should we take her? Right. I came to, I said, well, Vienna. My mother came from Vienna. We should go to Vienna. And it was a wonderful trip. It was a lot of fun, but it was also had a sort of heavy, not heavy, but it had a obviously meaningful Jewish content because of the family connection.
Yeah.
And I felt on that trip, every step, wherever we were, I mean, I speak German because we spoke German at home, but I literally felt my mother on my shoulder, whispering, you know, take her here, go to the Riesenrad. What's the matter with you? You have to get some opera in, take her to a concert. So my mother was nattering in my ear. My mother had already been dead for several years, but still, she was nattering away in my ear. And when I came back from that trip, I knew that if I didn't start the book, then I would never do it. No. Amazing. So wow. I did. That was the key.
Right. So that's lovely. That's really special. Very special. Now, obviously, the book is centered around your family's story and their experiences. And I think we should perhaps talk about why you called it, firstly, Good for a Single Journey. And also, I'm interested to know, as I said, it's historically factual, as I said, as much as it could be. Why did you particularly choose to write it as a novel?
Right. That's a very good question. It is very factual. All the small details, or either from my mother's stories or they were researched, there's very little in it that's made up. I mean, the tiniest details, which you probably think cannot possibly be true, actually were true. The reason I called it, I actually knew what the title would be pretty much from chapter 1. The reason I called it Good for a Single Journey, I brought a little prop, was because of this. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes.
It says, Deutsches Reich. I don't know if you can see the swastika.
Yes, can we see it? Yeah.
You can see it. Reisepass, it means passport. And in this, it's in pieces, I'm afraid, it's very old. If you look at it carefully, and again, you can see the J, the big J for Jude.
Right.
And here, my mother's name, which I'll read you, it was Amalia Clara Reis. In handwriting, it says, Zusätzlich Sarah. Additionally, Sarah. All Jewish girls and women were robbed of their names. They were just a Sarah. I believe the men were Israel. So they even deprived them of their names. And my mother's adventures, which are charted in the book, took her and her family to Prague. And from Prague, she was very fortunate. She finally got a visa to come to the UK. Many people, refugees, came on a so-called domestic visa. And this is it. I don't know if you can, yes, you can see it.
Yeah, we can see that.
If you can read it, it actually says passport control.
Oh, I see. Move it slightly across.
It says at the bottom.
Wow. Yeah.
Good for single journey.
Right.
And when I thought about that, so it's like a one-way ticket.
Right.
This was a visa which was good for one journey. And when I thought about that, I decided at an individual level, each of us only has one journey. At a family level, each of us only has one journey. And as a Jewish people, we are embarked on a single journey too. And we are still on that journey today. And that's why I called it I added the A, good for a single journey.
Right.
Grammatical, and the teacher in me wouldn't allow it.
That's fascinating. Wow, that's really special.
Yeah.
And just talk about why particularly wrote it as a novel. And
yes, my husband loves memoirs and history books, and I do too, to a degree, but I particularly wanted my book to be read. I wanted it to be read by young people and old people and Jewish people and non-Jewish people. And I thought a story, a novel format would grab people's attention and would be the way to go. So I wanted to write it in a way which was a page-turning way. Eventually, I think I hit the right methodology for that. Took me a couple of false starts. I was aided by my daughter, who ironically is a history graduate from King's College London and a keen historian herself. And my first draft, my first attempts, and my first chapter, she said to me, "It's great, you write nicely, but there's way too much history in it." So I did another redraft, sent it to her, and she said, "It's better." You know, she's a teacher, she wants to be encouraging, but it's basically still too much.
Right.
The third time, she lost her temper with me, and she said, "Make your mind up. Are you writing a novel or are you writing a history book?" Right. So I really rethought the structure of the book, and I hit on a vehicle, on a structure which I think, well, it seems to have worked. And I just let the novel go. I let the characters in each chapter tell their story, but I prefaced many of the chapters with a tiny paragraph which just gives the historical context at that time and in that place.
Right.
That's how I tried to solve it. But it's a bit of a mishmash. It's not a history, it's not a biography, it is a novel, but I wanted to, above all, my motive was that people should read it and want to.
How long was the process from start to finish? How long was the process from start to finish in writing?
The writing process was relatively quick. It took me, I remember we went, I got this laptop. I didn't own a laptop. I got that in September. I brought it back to Israel, finally unwrapped it in November, opened the thing up and thought, okay, we're starting. And I actually finished my first draft by June. So I think it was about 8 months to have a first draft. I think there were about 13 drafts. It took me another year to hone the drafts and get it right. And it took me another year to find a publisher. I was very fortunate to find a publisher, Amsterdam Publishers, and I'd like to give them a shout out because the owner of Amsterdam, Lisbeth, she's a wonderful Dutch non-Jewish woman who has devoted her career to publishing books involving the Holocaust and has spent the last few days outside The Hague protesting with the Israelis and the Jewish people out there. So she is a very remarkable person, and she was interested in publishing my book, so I was fortunate about that.
Wow. So longer than actually giving birth was.
Yes.
Yes. And what reception has the book had?
Oh, well, it's been amazing, actually. I think my biggest problem in writing the book was was the monkey on my back, which said, "Oh, who do you think you're kidding? You're going to write a successful book. You know, you're pushing 70. It's never going to happen." But it has. It won an award. I've been invited to London's Jewish Book Week, where I will be, please God, presenting my book on the 3rd of March. Any London people who want to go, look it up, book the tickets. You have to book, apparently, which is amazing. The reviews are great.
It's won awards, I understand. Don't be shy.
Yes, it has.
Incredible.
It is incredible to me.
Could you ever have read that when you first thought about it?
No, I just wanted to write her story and hope that maybe 1 or 2 people would read it. Didn't expect the reviews to come roaring in. And, I've had some great reviews.
Credit to you.
Yes, it's made an impact.
Great. Now you moved to Israel a few years ago. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
It's actually already 11 years. Yes.
Can I ask you, firstly, what motivated you to move there? And then also, secondly, do you see any parallels between the current situation, sadly, in Israel and your family's history, ironically?
Yes, yes, it is an irony. Well, what motivated us to move, we've been a Zionist family who often visited Israel on holidays and so forth. My husband was always very keen to live in Israel. It didn't happen when we were younger for all sorts of reasons. And at the time, our only married child at the time was our son. He lived in Israel with our grandchildren at that time. And after my parents, they both died in the same year, unfortunately, I became quite unwell and I had to give up work. And I just thought, well, if I'm not going to have a lot of time left, then we'll go and join our family. God has been very kind. So far, we've been here for 11 years and we're flourishing here, and we love every minute of it. And since then, all our children have made Aliyah. We have more grandchildren here. So we are very lucky. All of us have come home.
Wow. Living the dream.
Well, yes, right by the sea.
Wow.
Right. It is wonderful. And we have been very lucky. As far as the parallels with currents, obviously right now we're living through a very, very difficult time. It's heartbreaking, it's tragic, and it's infuriating as well when you see some of the international reaction to it. I do see parallels. I thought I was writing about a historical event, the Holocaust, the anti-Semitism. My mother always warned me, she said, you could see it could all happen again. Even in England, it could happen again. Right. And I thought, yeah. And yet we do see it happening again. And we see these terrible events here in Israel, the tragedy of the hostages, the soldiers. I just went for a short walk earlier and saw a soldier in uniform, a frum guy, with his wife. They were sitting on a bench. She was looking at him adoringly. She looked gorgeous with her mitpachat, and he looked like he hadn't showered for a month, which he probably hadn't. And it's so sad what we have here. And when you see the anti-Semitism, when I see about the marches in London, I think I'm more worried about coming to London than I am walking around in Jerusalem or anywhere, actually. You realize that we have not shaken off this history. The anti-Semitism has risen again. Yes, but for me, the journey that we had then, which was so dark back during the Holocaust, and I think Holocaust Memorial Day is a good time to reflect on that.
Yeah.
You know, we've survived, we got through it. More than that, we grew, and we will survive this too, and we will grow from it, and perhaps good things ultimately could emerge in terms of Israeli society and our relationships with our neighbors in the area. That's what we pray for, and that's what I firmly believe, actually.
Please go. How much do you think, as you know, as I said, we are marking Holocaust Memorial Day, how important do you think it is that people read novels like yours and other, you know, witness statement and testimony about what happened?
Yeah.
In order
obviously my publisher would say it's terribly important, buy a copy. But I do believe it's important because those stories, it's important at a lot of levels. It's important because it is a history and it is something people should know about and understand. My book is very much also a history of the early Yishuv. And there's a lot of misinformation around today about how Israel was founded and the factors that led to it under international law, its legitimacy. People believe a whole load of misinformation. And I have quite consciously taken the opportunity in my book to put some of that straight and give some facts which people have largely forgotten. And I think history is very important in that way, that you need to remember, because if you don't learn and if you don't remember, you can't really move on and you can't make sense of your present, and you certainly can't plan for your future. So I do think it's incredibly important. Holocaust Memorial Day as such in the UK, which is the 27th of January, which marks the liberation, I believe, the Russians liberated Auschwitz on the 27th of January 1945, which is why they latched onto that date.
Yeah.
I think it's important, not just for our community, we are well aware, but for the non-Jewish and wider communities, I think it's very important. Here in Israel, they have Yom HaShoah and they have Yom HaZikaron at different times. For my mother, I have to say, her personal Holocaust Memorial Day was always Tisha B'Av. And that was always a very difficult day in our family because she didn't have the yahrzeit dates to mark. And also Kol Nidra night, I used to dread because she would bring out this tablecloth, which was the one thing she had from her mother, and put the yahrzeit candle on it, because many people have the custom of lighting a yahrzeit light on Yom Kippur, and she would put her yahrzeit lights out on that cloth. And whenever I even saw that cloth, I thought, oh gosh.
Mind always, yeah.
Because we used to eat in the kitchen on Erev, you know, I don't know how it is in your family, but you know, you rush off to shul, but you lit the candles on the Yom Tov. It was a Yom Tov.
Yeah.
You lit the candles in the memorial light. So I do think these days that we mark and we will remember are crucially important. And I think more than anything else, we are a people of memory, and that's what keeps us, has kept us going.
Sure. Do you have a final sort of positive message that you'd like to emerge from all of this?
Well, I think, as I said, I think we have faced tough times. We are facing tough times. Doubtless we will face tough times in the future, but ultimately, I mean, you're the rabbi, but Hashem is with us. He has given us his word. We are here, I am here in our homeland. Please God, we should all be merited. You should all be merited to come and you know, live the life by the sea. Yes, and see the ultimate redemption. I think we're on our way. I think it's hard to see that right now, but I do think we're on our way.
Lovely. And as I said, ultimately, it's a story of survival, your personal story and the personal story of our people. It's a story of survival and therefore hope, as you said, for future redemption. Helen, thank you so much. We can't end without obviously giving a note. Obviously, it's a fantastic book, good for a single journey. So firstly, tell people where they can get hold of the copy of the book.
Right.
Tell us about your social media.
Yes, I have a lovely lady, Avital. She helps me with social media, which I'm completely rubbish at. And she said, mention your social. You mustn't forget to be ask people to follow you on Instagram and Facebook. And it's Helen Joyce Books. It's at Helen Joyce Books. You can get my book on Amazon. You can order it in your local bookshops. And at the moment, because I believe of Jewish Book Week, Blackwell's is actually offering it with free worldwide shipping, which is quite good, because if you're ordering to Israel or South Africa or anywhere else, the shipping adds considerably to the costs. But you can buy it on Amazon and yeah.
Right. Good. Well, please.
Good for a single
to get hold of
I should hold up the book. I know.
Please do. Let's have a look.
Won't forgive me if I don't hold it. This is it.
Fantastic. Good for a single journey. Wonderful. Available in all good online bookstores and your local shops as well.
Exactly.
And on social media, find out more on the social media with Helen Joyce Books. Hashtag, I suppose. But thank you, Helen, so much for that. Really appreciate it. I think it's a really important way, and I think a really a special and moving way to hear your own personal story for Holocaust Memorial Day. You know, you've acted as, you know, you've given us that testimony and that personal account and witness of what happened, so that we can never forget.
Thank you. Can I just add one thing? I don't know if people do watch this, it may stir up feelings, or they may want to contact me. They're very welcome to contact me via the Helen Joyce Books website.com as well. People can ask questions, and I know that the story can stir up memories for other people.
Sure, no, that's very helpful.
If they want to do that, I'd be very happy to be in contact.
That's great. Lovely. Thank you so much. I wish you and your family continued good health, and lots of nachas from your children, your grandchildren as well. And be well, and thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.